Imagine a bleak morning in London, in the year 1305. The streets are packed with people. A screech of wooden wheels slides across the stone, dragging a plank on which a man is bound tightly. He does not beg, does not plead. His face is gaunt, but his eyes still blaze with something that even death cannot extinguish: faith in freedom. That man is William Wallace, and on that day, he will be executed in the most barbaric way mankind ever devised: hanged, disemboweled, his organs burned, his head cut off, and his body quartered. Nearly 2 centuries later, another morning, this time in Rouen, France, a girl not yet 20, her hair freshly shorn, steps onto a towering wooden platform. At her feet, bundles of wood are stacked into the shape of a dry tower. They say the fire will cleanse the sins of a witch. But the people know she is not a witch. They know she once commanded armies, saving an entire nation from the brink of annihilation. Her name is Joan d'Arc, or Joan of Arc, as history records, and in a moment, the fire will devour that slender body. But her soul will never. Rewind another 2 centuries, to a cold autumn day in Naples, in the year 1268. In the middle of the square, a 16-year-old boy, his face still carrying the traces of youth, steps onto the scaffold, not a criminal, but a prince, the last heir of the most powerful dynasty in Europe at that time, the Hohenstaufen. The sentence is carried out with a single cold stroke death for the one labelled a rebel. Though royal blood flowed in his veins, his name is Conradin, and with the head that fell upon the wooden block that day, an entire era came to an end. 3 deaths. 3 different methods of execution: quartering, burning at the stake, beheading. But they all had one thing in common. They were not just punishments. They were messages. They were plays of power, where the human body became the stage, and blood and fire became props for a single message. Do not challenge this order. Yet there was one thing kings and mighty clerics never foresaw. The more brutal they were, the more powerless they became before one truth: ideas do not die with the body. And it was precisely their cruelty that turned rebels into legends, transforming death sentences into opening chapters of immortal stories. Let us embark on a dark yet haunting journey to uncover the most gruesome executions of the Middle Ages, where the scaffold not only killed, but also wrote history. In the medieval world, justice did not unfold behind closed doors. It was displayed in the public square. Not only because people believed in the deterrent power of violence, but also because death was transformed into a ritual of power. In that era, public death was the strongest political language. The king, the pope, those who held power understood well. A silent execution in a dark dungeon only killed one person. But a bloody spectacle before the masses could kill an idea. Or at least, that was what they believed. This was not the outburst of anger. Every detail, from the placement of the scaffold, the construction of the platform, to each stroke of the blade, each flame was carefully calculated to create a performance. People called it the spectacle of power, the performance of authority, and in those performances, the human body became the prop. A traitor hung upon the cross, a heretic burned in the flames, a prince kneeling beneath the blade. All were symbols. Those images were carved deeply into the memory of the community. As a warning, this is the fate of those who defy the sacred order. But what was more terrifying was the religious meaning attached to violence. Burning at the stake did not only kill, Prus. It was seen as a way to purify the soul. Beheading was not only punishment, it was the church's way of declaring that they held the power to grant life and take it away in the name of God. Each strike of the sword, each burning log, was not merely law, but a holy decree written in blood. However, the rulers made a mistake that history has always repeated. They underestimated the power of the story. When these executions took place, the crowd did not only see a rebel destroyed, they saw a human being brave, steadfast, even sacred, facing death without fear. And in that moment, the message of power was stolen. When the fire consumed Joan, the people whispered her name as saint. When Conradin's head fell upon the block, they picked up his glove as a relic. When Wallace was quartered, the Scots did not see a traitor, they saw a hero. That was the tragic paradox of the Middle Ages. The most brutal punishments did not create submission, but forged legends, and no clearer proof exists than the 3 executions we are about to enter. Now, let us begin with the first story. A man whose death was recorded in history as one of the most gruesome executions of all time, William Wallace. At the end of the 13th century, Scotland writhed under the rule of Edward I. From a minor nobleman, William Wallace rose after an English sheriff killed his lover. The bloody revenge at Lanark turned him into the banner of resistance. In the year 1297, Wallace achieved victory at Stirling Bridge, shattering the mighty English army with nothing more than the spears of peasants. But defeat at Falkirk forced him into exile. Even so, Wallace's name remained Edward's greatest fear. On the 5th of August, 1305, he was betrayed and captured. At Westminster, Wallace declared before the court, "I did not betray Edward, for I was never his subject." The sentence was predetermined hanging, disembowelment, quartering, beheading. The next morning, he was stripped naked, bound to a plank, and dragged through the streets of London amid the jeers of the crowd. At Smithfield, Wallace was hanged until nearly dead, then cut down in his agony. The executioner slit open his abdomen, tore out his entrails, and cast them into the fire before his very eyes. The torment was not over. Wallace was castrated, and only at last granted release by the final stroke of the axe. His body was cut into 4 parts, his head dipped in tar and set upon London Bridge, his limbs sent to towns across Scotland as a bloody message. But that message failed. The blood of Wallace became a vow, transforming him into an eternal symbol of Scotland's freedom. William Wallace died in agony, but from his ashes, Scotland continued to write its song of freedom. Yet, a few centuries later, another flame rose, this time in France, and not from a seasoned warrior, but from a girl not yet 20. She not only defied England, but also shook the very foundations of the authority of the Church. That was Joan d'Arc. At the beginning of the 15th century, France was dying in the 100 Years' War. Villages were burned. The king had not been crowned, and the people lived under the shadow of defeat. In the midst of that despair, a peasant girl from Domremy heard a call from heaven. Jeanne d'Arc said that angels told her to lead an army to save France and to place the Dauphin Charles on the throne. No one believed that a poor young maiden could change the fate of a nation. But Jeanne did it. In the year 1429, she led the army to break the siege of Orleans. A resounding victory. On the day Charles was crowned at Reims, Jeanne stood beside the throne in shining armor, a living symbol of a miracle. But the glory quickly faded. The following year, Jeanne was captured at Compiègne and sold to the English for 10,000 gold coins. The trial at Rouen was not about justice, but about breaking the symbol. The charges heresy, wearing men's clothing, defying the Church. Jeanne answered calmly, leaving behind an immortal declaration, "If I am not in God's grace, may He put me there. If I am, may He keep me there forever." On the 30th of May, 1431, at the square of Rouen, Jeanne stepped onto the pyre in a simple white gown, her head shaven, As the flames rose, she still cried out the name of God. Witnesses said her voice carried until the smoke choked her lungs. After her body was reduced to ashes, the English soldiers searched through the remains for her heart. They said it would not burn. In the end, her ashes were thrown into the River Seine so that no relics would remain. The English believed they had erased a threat, but in truth, they had created a saint. Jean became the eternal flame of France, and nearly 500 years later, the Church was forced to canonize her, the very one once burned for heresy. If Jean was the symbol of faith, then the final figure was the proof of the fragility of royal blood, a boy of only 16, carrying within him the blood of emperors, stepped onto the scaffold, not for any crime, but for his lineage itself. That was Conradin, the last prince of the House of Hohenstaufen. In the year 1268, Europe was shaken by the war for the Kingdom of Sicily. The Hohenstaufen had once ruled as masters of Europe, but when Conradin inherited as a teenager, that power was only a shadow. Urged on by German knights and the Italian Ghibelline faction, Conradin led his army across the Alps to restore the glory of his ancestors. At first, he won many battles and was hailed by the people. But on the 23rd of August, 1268, at Tagliacozzo, fate turned. Conradin's forces seemed victorious, but the French cavalry of Charles of Anjou struck from behind. The German army collapsed. The prince fled, but was betrayed and handed over to his enemies. At Naples, a court was staged to legitimize a sentence already decided death for usurping the Pope's authority. On the 29th of October, 1268, in a square packed with people, Conradin stepped onto the scaffold in simple clothes. Witnesses recalled that his face was so calm it made the executioner hesitate. Before kneeling, Conradin threw his glove into the crowd, his final challenge: "Take it to my kin, so they will know how I died." The cold blade ended the life of the 16-year-old, and with it, the Hohenstaufen vanished from the map of power. But like Wallace and Jean, that death did not fade into oblivion. It became the symbol of a lost era and a lesson in the cruelty of power cloaked as justice.